The first time the truck rolled into the shop, it didn't so much arrive as surrender. Its tires were half flat and cracked like old leather. The paint, once a proud factory color, had faded into a chalky, sunburned haze, interrupted by islands of rust that spread along the fenders and door bottoms. The bed was full of debris, broken tie-downs, a nest of dry leaves, and a fuel can that smelled like a decade of bad decisions. Even before the hood was lifted, the truck told its story in silence. Long seasons of neglect, followed by one last attempt to run that ended in failure. But the bones were there. Solid frame rails, a cab that hadn't sagged, classic proportions that made the whole thing look honest, even in ruin. The kind of American pickup that didn't need to shout because it had already proven itself in barns, back roads, and job sites across generations. The plan wasn't to build a show queen. It wasn't going to be a full-blown resto-mod with a modern drivetrain and a dashboard full of screens. This project had a different aim. Bring it back to life mechanically, make it reliable, and give it a restrained custom touch. The kind of upgrades that look like they could have been done in the era, just better executed. The work began the way it always should, with the facts. A battery charger hummed in the corner. A borescope slid into the spark plug holes to look inside cylinders that hadn't seen clean combustion in years. A compression gouge followed, then a leaky down test. The numbers were uneven. Some acceptable, some worrying. The engine would turn, but it didn't want to. The starter groaned. The crankshaft moved like it was pushing through thick syrup, as if every internal surface had forgotten what oil felt like. When the fuel line was cracked open, what dribbled out wasn't gasoline. It was varnish. Sweet and rotten at the same time. The first safety note was non-negotiable. Old fuel and unknown wiring are a fire risk. Fire extinguisher placed within reach, ventilation on and no shortcuts. The shop didn't gamble with sparks. The truck went up on stands, and the teardown started in earnest. Stripped down and revealed the truth. The bolts didn't come loose. They negotiated. Some snapped clean. Others spun with that sickening softness of threads already half-eaten by corrosion. Penetrating oil, heat, patience. An impact gun for the stubborn ones, and a breaker bar for the ones that would rather die than move. As the front end came apart, bumper, grilly, radiator support, the real condition of the truck appeared layer by layer. The radiator was stained and weeping. The hoses were brittle. The water pump showed play at the shaft. The belts looked like they'd been chewed. Underneath, the steering components told their own story. Tired tie rod ends, a center link with slack, and bushings that had flattened into cracked rubber pancakes. The brake lines were a warning sign too. Surface rust in places, dampness around fittings. The wiring loom was a mess of splices and mismatched colors. Electrical tape, crimp connectors. A few sections that looked like they'd been repaired during a storm, in the dark, with the wrong tools. This wasn't just a restoration. It was a rescue. And then came the first cliffhanger, the engine oil. When the drain plug came out, the oil didn't pour. It crawled. Black, thick, metallic in the light. It carried glitter in suspension, the kind you never want to see. That meant one thing: the engine would need to come out. New debate. Engine out. Engine open. With the hood removed and the engine hoisted free, the shop got quiet in that focused way it does when something important is about to be discovered. The engine sat on a stand like a patient waiting for surgery. The intake came off first, then the carburetor. Sticky and stained, likely gummed up beyond simple cleaning. The valve covers followed. Underneath, sludge clung to the rockers and springs like tar. The top end had been living without proper oil changes for a long time. A timing cover removed, and the timing chain showed slack. The oil pan came down and the suspicion turned into certainty. Metal in the bottom, fragments that didn't belong. The crankshaft journals were scarred. The bearings looked tired. Some worn through their protective layer. The engine could have been forced back to life with fresh oil and optimism, but it would have been a lie. A short-lived lie. So the call was made. Rebuild it correctly. The block went to the machine shop for cleaning and measurement. Cylinder walls were checked for taper and out of round. If the cylinders needed to be bored, they'd go oversize and get matching pistons. The cylinder head would be inspected for cracks and warped surfaces, then resurfaced if needed. Valve seats would be cut properly, valves replaced where necessary, and spring pressures checked. Meanwhile, every part that could be restored in-house went through a process: degreasing, bead blasting, and careful evaluation. A few components earned their redemption in an ultrasonic cleaner. The carburetor body, disassembled and stripped of its old gaskets, soaked as the machine hummed. Passages that once carried fuel and air slowly released the residue of abandonment. A torque wrench hung on the wall like a promise. When the time came to put it all back together, it would be done by the numbers. Chassis, brakes, and the parts nobody brags about. A restored truck that can't stop is a liability. A restored truck that can't steer is a hazard. The glamorous parts aren't the ones that keep you alive. So the focus shifted to the underpinnings. Brake drums came off reluctantly. Wheel cylinders were in no shape to trust. The master cylinder, old and tired, wasn't a candidate for maybe. Brake liners were replaced where needed, and the system would later be flushed with fresh fluid until it ran clean. The front suspension was rebuilt with new bushings and refreshed steering joints. Worn parts were pressed out with a hydraulic press. Slow pressure, steady control, no violence. Then pressed back in with the quiet certainty of correct fitment. The drive chain wasn't part of this story. This was a pickup, not a motorcycle. But the same philosophy applied. Power delivery and safety are only as good as the weakest link. For the truck, that meant the driveshaft and U-joints, the differential fluid, and the axle seals. Those got checked, serviced, and replaced where required. Time estimates started stacking up, teardown and assessment. 2 days. Engine machining turnaround. 2 weeks depending on schedule. Chassis and brakes refresh. 2 a 4 days. Paint and finish prep. 4 a 7 days. Reassembly and tuning. 3 a 6 days. A project like this doesn't reward impatience. The light custom touch. Tasteful, not loud. The customization was intentionally restrained. The aim was to keep the truck's identity intact while giving it a sharper stance and a cleaner presence. First, wheels and tires. The original wheels, if they were saved, would be kept as artifacts. But the truck deserved a set that complemented its lines. A classic wheel design slightly wider than stock, with modern rubber that improved grip without looking out of place. Nothing oversized. Nothing flashy. Just right. Second, stance. Not slammed. Not lifted to the sky. A milded drop. Subtle enough that you'd question if it was stock until you parked it next to an untouched example. The result, the truck looked more purposeful, like it had been tuned by someone who understood proportion. Third, lighting and small trim details. Old sealed beams can be charming, but they're not always safe at night. So the lighting was upgraded discreetly. Better bulbs, cleaner housings, wiring done properly with relays where needed. The old brittle wiring loom was replaced section by section with proper connectors, heat shrink, and rotting that looked like it belonged. The custom was not a costume. It was refinement, bodywork, paint, and the moment everything changes. Bodywork is where time disappears. Rust doesn't just sit on the surface. It eats, creeps, hides under paint and filler. The only honest fix is cutting out what's gone and replacing it with steel that will last. The fenders and lower cab corners were addressed first. The metal was cleaned back to truth, patched where needed, and sealed properly. The bed received attention too. Straightened in places, reinforced where it had weakened. Then came surface prep. Sanding, feathering edges, laying primer, sanding again. A cycle of patience that doesn't look dramatic on camera until you compare before and after. And that's where the first major before bara, after comparison hit like a punch. Before, dull, rusted panels with mismatched shades. After primer, smooth, uniform surfaces that hinted at what was coming. The color choice mattered. A factory-inspired tone. Classic and timeless. With a clean, clear coat that gave depth without looking modern plastic. In the paint booth, the truck transformed from a tired relic into something that felt newly manufactured, but still rooted in its era. The chrome and trim pieces were refreshed. Some were polished. Others were replated. The difference wasn't just shine. It was dignity. Reassembly, torquey specs, and first fire. When the engine came back from machining, it looked like a promise kept. Clean block, measured surfaces, fresh internals. New bearings. New rings. A rebuilt cylinder head with properly seated valves. Assembly wasn't rushed. Bearing clearances checked. Plastic gauge used where needed. Lubrication applied correctly. Fasteners torqued in sequence. The torque wrench clicked with authority. Each click a small statement. This is being done right. A rebuilt carburetor went back on with fresh gaskets. Fluids were chosen carefully. Brake and oil were appropriate. Cooling system filled properly with the correct mix. Fuel delivery verified. And then, the cliffhanger. Would it start? Ignition on. A few cranks. The engine turned. Stronger now, smoother. One cough. Then another. Then, finally, combustion caught and held. The exhaust note settled into a steady rhythm that sounded like time reversing. Oil pressure came up and stayed stable. Coolant temperature rose slowly, controlled. No immediate leaks. No panic. Just the quiet, unbelievable relief that comes when months of work turns into a living machine. The reveal. What it became. The final before Barra after comparison didn't need words. Before. A truck that looked like it would never run again. After. Clean paint. Honest stance. Restrained wheels, tidy engine bay, and a presence that made the shop feel smaller. Like the truck had grown into itself. The interior wasn't turned into a luxury lounge. It was made right. Restored gauges, clean wiring, new seals to stop wind noise, fresh but period-appropriate materials. The steering wheel felt solid. The pedals felt predictable. The truck felt safe. And then came the test drive. The first few miles were cautious. Listening for noises. Watching gauges. Feeling for pull under braking. Checking steering response. The truck tracked straight. The brakes were firm. The engine pulled cleanly. Then, once confidence settled in, the throttle opened a little more. The pickup responded like it had been waiting for this moment for years. It wasn't perfect in a sterile way. It was perfect in a human way. Reborn, honest, and ready to live again. A lightly customized classic truck doesn't need to be extreme to be compelling. It just needs to be true. And now it was. The forgotten engineering that made these trucks last. What most people don't realize about these classic American pickups is that their longevity wasn't an accident. It was deliberate over-engineering. The steel used in frames and body panels was thicker than modern equivalents, often 14 gauge where today's trucks use 16 gauge or thinner. This wasn't just about strength. It was about tolerance for repair. Mechanics of the era expected these trucks to be fixed, not replaced, so they built them with enough material to withstand decades of welding patches and reinforcement. The 302 V8 engine in our Ford F-100 had a fascinating design quirk. Its crankshaft counterweights were intentionally undersized from the factory. This wasn't a cost-cutting measure. It was a vibration management strategy. The engine was designed to run at specific RPM ranges where the harmonics balanced out, creating that distinctive smooth idle that feels like a heartbeat rather than a machine. When rebuilding one, you can't just swap in any crankshaft. You need to match the factory's harmonic profile or risk shaking the truck apart at certain speeds. The secret language of factory paint codes. That classic red we chose. It wasn't just red. Factory paint codes from the 1970 segundos tell stories about regional preferences and industrial capabilities. Vermilion Rungum Code M523. Awaz is specifically formulated for southern and western markets where sun exposure was extreme. It contained higher UV inhibitors than northern market colors, which is why you'll find better preserved original paint on trucks from Texas than from Michigan. The clear coat technology of the era was primitive by today's standards. Often just a thin layer of acrylic that yellowed over time. That's why so many original trucks look faded even when the color underneath is intact. Modern two-stage clear coats don't just look better. They're chemically engineered to resist oxidation in ways 1970 segundos chemists could only dream of. The tool that changed everything. The ultrasonic cleaner. Before ultrasonic cleaners became affordable for home shops, restoring small parts was a nightmare of chemical baths and wire brushes. The ultrasonic cleaner works on a principle called cavitation, creating microscopic bubbles in cleaning solution that implode with enough force to dislodge carbon deposits from the tiniest passages. For our carburetor, this meant that fuel metering circuits that hadn't flowed properly in 20 years were restored to factory specification without manual probing. What's fascinating is the frequency range. 40 kHz is ideal for automotive parts. High enough to clean thoroughly, but low enough not to damage delicate aluminum castings. Higher frequencies like 80 kHz are better for jewelry. Lower frequencies 25 kHz for industrial parts. Getting this wrong can mean the difference between a perfectly restored component and a ruined one. The mathematics of stance. Why that mild drop works. Our subtle drop wasn't arbitrary. It followed the golden ratio principle applied to automotive design. By lowering the truck approximately 2 inches front and 3 inches rear, we achieved a rake angle of about 5 degrees. This isn't just for looks. It improves aerodynamics at highway speeds by reducing front-end lift, and it places the center of gravity in a sweet spot between stability and maneuverability. The wheel-bar tire combination was calculated using scrub radius and offset mathematics. Too much positive offset and the steering feels heavy, too much negative and it becomes twitchy. We aimed for 15 mm offset. Close enough to stock to maintain original steering geometry, but enough to accommodate slightly wider tires without rubbing. The hidden cost, consumables no one talks about. When estimating restoration costs, everyone thinks about big-ticket items, engine parts, paint, upholstery. But the hidden budget killers are consumables. Welding gas. A single truck can consume 3 a 4 tanks of shielding gas, argon/C, ou 2 mix for MIG welding, sandpaper, and abrasives. Between bodywork and paint prep, you'll go through hundreds of sheets across grits from 80 to 2000. Cleaning solvents, brake cleaner, carburetor cleaner, degreaser. These add up to $500 in a full restoration. Shop towels and rags. You'll use 50 pounds of disposable towels, masking supplies, tape, paper, plastic sheeting. Another $200 a 300 easily. The time capsule effect. What we found inside. During the teardown, we discovered artifacts that told the truck's life story. Behind the seat, a 1978 gasoline receipt from a station that no longer exists, showing $0. 65 per gallon. Under the floor mat, pennies from 1972, 1975, and 1981. Likely dropped during repairs. In the glove box, a handwritten maintenance log showing oil changes every 3 miles until 1989, then nothing. Inside the door panel, a baseball card from 1976, perfectly preserved in the dry cavity. These weren't just trash. They were historical markers. The maintenance log showed conscientious care for 17 years, then abandonment. The baseball card suggested a younger owner, maybe a teenager who drove the truck to school. The pennies represented small moments of inattention that became permanent time capsules. The sound engineering, why that exhaust note matters. The exhaust system on a classic V8 isn't just about moving gases. It's about acoustic engineering. The header primary tubby length determines where torque peaks in the RPM range. The collector design affects scavenging efficiency. The muffler internal baffles shape the sound character. We chose a chambered muffler rather than a straight-through design because it produces that classic mellow rumble at idle that transitions to a clean bark at full throttle. Straight-through mufflers are louder, but often sound harsh and tinny on older engines. The chambered design uses Helmholtz resonance principles to cancel certain frequencies while amplifying others, creating that signature American V8 sound that feels like it comes from the chest, not just the tailpipe. The final irony. Modern technology in a classic package. The most satisfying part of this restoration was using 20th century technology to perfect 20th century engineering. Digital turkey wrenches that beep at exact specifications. Infrared thermometers to check brake rotor temperatures during bedding. Borescopes to inspect cylinder walls without disassembly. Laser alignment systems for perfect wheel geometry. We weren't just rebuilding a truck. We were giving it the care it always deserved, but never received, using tools its original engineers would have marveled at. And in doing so, we created something that bridges eras. A machine with the soul of the 1970s and the reliability of the 2020s.